What happens when one of Hollywood's most legendary actors goes head-to-head with a late-night host whose ego overshadows his wit? A total disaster. So explosive that CBS execs are still trying to scrub it from existence. The infamous clash between Nicolas Cage and Stephen Colbert on The Late Show wasn't just an awkward interview. It was a full-blown collision of two oversized personas, a moment that peeled back the curtain on one of late night's most carefully curated facades. Stick around, because I'll reveal the exact comment Colbert made that caused Cage to erupt in a fury so intense, security was called to the set. But before we dig into this meltdown, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Are you Team Cage or Team Colbert in this wild showdown? From the moment Nicolas Cage walked on stage, the tension was electric. Anyone who knows Cage's legacy, over 100 films, an Academy Award, and a reputation for pouring himself into every role, expected a level of respect. Instead, viewers witnessed a bizarre, uncomfortable exchange that spiraled out of control. Colbert opened with what seemed like harmless banter, but his tone dripped with condescension. Nicolas Cage, the man of 1,000 faces, and even more memes. Thanks for finally gracing us with your presence. Cage, ever the professional, gave a tight smile and thanked Colbert for the invitation, hoping to promote his newest passion project, a film he'd spent years crafting. But Colbert clearly had no interest in serious discussion. As Cage began, describing the film's emotional depth, Colbert abruptly interrupted. So, is it true you once dropped over $300,000 on a dinosaur skull, only to return it when you found out it was stolen? The audience chuckled nervously. Cage's smile faded. I was hoping we could focus on the film, Stephen. It's some of my most personal work. Colbert nodded with mock sincerity. Of course. But come on. The audience wants the wild stuff. Dinosaur bones, castles, your legendary spending sprees. The laughter grew, but it felt forced. Cage's posture stiffened. The tension was no longer subtle. It was visible. Again, Cage tried to steer the interview back to his work. Again, Colbert derailed it. Your new film looks interesting, Colbert said with a smirk. But I have to ask, those viral scenes from your older movies where you just completely lose it, how much of that is acting, and how much is just Nicolas Cage being Nicolas Cage? It was a blatant dig, one that struck a nerve. A career defined by risk-taking and artistic devotion was being mocked as nothing more than meme fodder. What audiences didn't see was what happened off-camera. During the commercial break, sources from the production crew say, Cage calmly approached Colbert and asked for a little more respect. I'm happy to have fun, Cage reportedly said, but I came here to talk about my art, not be the punchline to outdated internet jokes. Colbert allegedly waved him off. Lighten up, he said. Learn to take a joke. That offhand dismissal said more than 1,000 smirks ever could. It was a glimpse into the true Colbert. A far cry from the thoughtful, self-aware host he plays on screen. When the cameras came back on, the mood had soured, and Colbert, perhaps threatened by Cage's quiet pushback, decided to double down. Welcome back to The Late Show. We're here with Nicolas Cage, who's apparently out of castles to buy and is now focused on... What was it again? Art films. The condescension was undeniable. Cage inhaled deeply, his jaw clenched. He was trying, really trying, to keep his cool. But what came next would shatter the thin veneer of civility and turn an awkward interview into a televised implosion. Stephen, I've been in this industry for decades, Cage began, his voice calm but laced with simmering intensity. I've worked with some of the greatest directors and actors of our time. I've won an Oscar, been nominated for another, and dedicated my life to the craft of acting. I came here tonight out of respect for you and your audience, hoping we could have a meaningful conversation about a project that means a great deal to me. Instead, he said, glancing around the silent studio, you've chosen to reduce me to a punchline. The audience, sensing the shift, fell into an uneasy stillness. This wasn't light-hearted late-night fare. This was raw, unfiltered. Colbert adjusted in his chair, caught off guard by Cage's candid confrontation. Well, he chuckled awkwardly, I think we're all aware of your body of work. But come on, you have to admit, some of those performances are, let's say, a bit over the top. The audience eats it up. The not the bees thing. Classic Cage. It was a flippant remark, but it struck a nerve. Something shifted in Cage's posture. The collected demeanor gave way to a deeper conviction, the same magnetic focus that had driven some of his most iconic roles. You know what, Stephen? He said, leaning slightly forward. I've spent my entire career pushing boundaries, exploring what acting can be. I've made bold choices. Sure, not everyone understands them, and that's okay. That's what art is, subjective. But what I find disappointing is how eager people like you are to ridicule creative risks while taking none of your own. Gasps echoed from the audience. A few even clapped. Colbert's smile faltered. His eyes darted toward the producers off camera, visibly rattled. I think we're getting a little off track here, he said, tugging at his collar. No, Cage shot back, his voice steady. I think we're finally getting on track. The room tensed as Cage continued, unflinching. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my work. But your real agenda was to mock me, to entertain your audience at my expense. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's not even comedy. It's lazy. The cameras, normally cutting to wide angles or reactions, remained fixed on Cage. This wasn't television anymore. This was a reckoning. Let me ask you something, he continued, his voice quiet but resolute. When was the last time you took a real risk in your career? When was the last time you made yourself truly vulnerable, knowing you might fail, but doing it anyway because that's what integrity and art demand? Colbert's expression shifted. The smug, knowing host was gone, replaced by someone visibly shaken. Trying to diffuse the moment, he attempted humor. Well, I did wear a pretty bold tie last week. A smattering of awkward laughter trickled through the audience, but it was clear the room was with Cage now. See? That's exactly what I mean, Cage said, shaking his head. You hide behind irony and sarcasm. You've built a career mocking others while standing for very little yourself. Night after night, you recycle the same tired political jokes, creating an echo chamber where everyone can feel smugly superior together. The producers, sensing things spiraling beyond their control, were now frantically signaling from the wings, slashing fingers across their throats. Cut it short. But Colbert hesitated, perhaps realizing that ending the segment now would only confirm Cage's accusations. He pressed on. I think you're being a little unfair, he said, his tone defensive. This show is about speaking truth to power, using comedy to tackle serious issues. No, Stephen, Cage interrupted. This show is about appearing brave while doing the safe thing. There's nothing courageous about parroting opinions your audience already agrees with. That's not truth to power. It's pandering. It's performative. And it's corrosive. Why? Could hear a pin drop. I came here tonight, Cage said, because I thought, despite our differences, you might be someone who valued real conversation. I see now that was a mistake. You're not interested in honest dialogue. You want viral clips and cheap laughs, even if it means tearing someone down. Colbert's face had turned a deep red, one that even the best makeup artist would struggle to conceal. His jaw clenched slightly, eyes darting for a lifeline that wasn't coming. Nicolas Cage sat back, quiet now. The damage had been done. Or perhaps truth had simply found a mic. Well, Nicolas, if that's how you feel, Colbert said coolly, his smile now brittle. Maybe this wasn't the right venue for you. We try to keep things light and entertaining here. Light and entertaining doesn't have to mean shallow or disrespectful, Cage replied evenly. Your audience deserves more credit. They're capable of engaging with substance and style. Colbert gave a sharp gesture to the floor manager, signaling for a commercial break. The applause signs lit up, the cameras cut, and the mood in the studio fractured. Some audience members clapped hesitantly. Others sat frozen in stunned silence, still processing the rupture in the usually polished, predictable rhythm of late-night television. Backstage, chaos ignited. Production assistants darted between camera setups. Colbert huddled with his producers and head writer, their voices low but urgent. On set, Nicolas Cage remained seated, composed and unmoving, calm in the center of the storm he had just summoned. A senior producer cautiously approached him. Mr. Cage? She said quietly. Perhaps it's best we wrap up the segment here. We can edit out the more contentious moments. Edit all you want, Cage said, his voice raised just enough for nearby crew to hear. But if you cut the truth, people will notice. There are 300 people in this room who saw what happened, and your own crew, who know what's real. Paffer, producer, glanced nervously toward Colbert, who was deep in discussion, his demeanor taut. Eventually, a decision was made. The interview would continue, but with an effort to steer things back to safe, familiar terrain. As the cameras rolled again, Colbert had reset his expression, delivering his signature grin as though nothing out of the ordinary had taken place. Welcome back to The Late Show. We're here with Nicolas Cage, talking about his new film. And apparently, the state of late-night television, he said with forced levity. Let's shift gears a bit, shall I? I hear you're quite the history buff. Is there a historical figure you'd love to portray, one you haven't yet had the chance to? It was a transparent pivot. Cage didn't bite. You know what's interesting about history, Stephen? He said, fixing Colbert with a steady gaze. It teaches us about integrity, about standing up for what you believe in, even when it's uncomfortable, about not compromising your principles for popularity or convenience. Colbert's smile began to falter. Well, speaking of history, your new film is set in. I think we should address what just happened. Cage interrupted. You tried to humiliate me on national television, and when I called you on it, you cut to commercial and acted like nothing occurred. Now you want to change the subject to something safe. That's not a real conversation. That's damage control. The audience was riveted. This wasn't a meltdown nor a publicity stunt. It was something deeper, an articulate, unscripted dismantling of the late-night facade. I don't think that's a fair characterization of... Colbert began. But Cage wasn't done. Let me ask your audience something, he said, turning to the crowd. How many of you are tired of the same recycled jokes, the same political cliches, the same manufactured moments night after night? How many of you want something real, something honest, in your entertainment." A murmur swept through the studio. Then, surprisingly, a wave of applause. Cheers. Even a few standing. Colbert looked visibly shaken. "I think we're getting a bit off topic," he said, trying to sound in control. "We're here to talk about your film, not conduct a focus group on the state of TV." "And that's exactly the problem," Cage shot back. "You want to control every inch of this moment. You want me to sit here, smile, tell a couple of pre-rehearsed anecdotes your researchers found, and leave quietly so you can mock me afterward. That's not conversation. It's performance, and not an honest one." The entire atmosphere had shifted. What started as a standard late-night interview had transformed into something raw and unprecedented. A public reckoning with the performative, predictable nature of modern entertainment, laid bare by a man refusing to play along. The audience, initially uneasy with the rising tension, was now riveted. What had started as discomfort had transformed into investment, allegiances shifting perceptibly toward Cage as he methodically dismantled the glossy artifice of the Late Show. Colbert's expression had hardened. His trademark charm faded, replaced by a thin veil of barely contained frustration. This was his domain, his stage, and Nicolas Cage had committed a cardinal sin, pulling back the curtain to expose the machinery behind the magic. "I think we've gotten a bit off track," Colbert said tightly. "My job is to help people unwind, to entertain them at the end of a long day, not to host philosophical debates about the nature of late-night television." "And that's where we disagree," Cage replied, unflinching. "I believe entertainment can still have depth. I believe the audience is far more intelligent than this industry gives them credit for. And I believe honest, unscripted conversation, even when it's uncomfortable, is more meaningful than viral sound bites or pre-packaged banter." Colbert darted a glance off stage. His executive producer was gesturing wildly, drawing a frantic finger across her throat. Cut it off. End it now. The interview had spiraled far beyond their control. "Well, unfortunately," Colbert began, forcing composure, "we're running short on time. The audience could see the studio clock. They had several minutes left." "How convenient," Cage said with a dry smile. "The moment the conversation gets real, we suddenly run out of time. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Stephen. Shows like this pretend to be platforms for meaningful discussion, but the moment things stop fitting into the formula, you shut it down." Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. A few broke into spontaneous applause. Colbert's jaw clenched. He was losing them, and he knew it. Security. He muttered into his lapel mic, barely audible. But the first few rows heard it. A collective gasp rippled through the studio. Cage raised an eyebrow. "Are you seriously calling security, Stephen? For what? Speaking truthfully. For not playing along with your manufactured narrative?" "This interview is over," Colbert said flatly. "We'll be right back after these messages." But the cameras didn't cut, whether due to technical error or the quiet defiance of someone in the control room. They kept rolling. 2 security guards appeared at the edge of the stage. A surreal hush fell over the room. So this is how The Late Show, with Stephen Colbert, handles dissent? Cage said, rising from his chair, his voice calm and unwavering. Not with dialogue, not with self-reflection, but with security and censorship. That speaks volumes. The audience erupted, not into chaos, but into reaction. Some booed, some cheered, others stood, recording with their phones, ensuring that no amount of post-production or corporate spin could erase what was happening. "Cut to commercial!" Colbert barked, the mask now fully dropped. "Cut to commercial now!" The feed finally switched to an advertisement. But the damage was already irreversible. On set, Cage was escorted away, head high, dignity intact. A scattering of audience members stood and walked out in protest, an open rebuke to a host who had long marketed himself as the voice of reason and authenticity in late-night television. Backstage, the scramble had begun. Network executives huddled in emergency meetings. Phones rang off the hook. Publicists, agents, crisis managers activated. The narrative would have to be flipped fast. By morning, they'd push a new story. That Cage had been erratic, difficult, possibly under the influence. Anything to smear the man who, in the span of a single unscripted moment, had cracked open the glossy veneer of late-night media and exposed something uncomfortably true underneath. But in the age of smartphones and social media, CBS's attempts at damage control proved futile. Audience members were already uploading clips and first-hand accounts, describing how Nicolas Cage had stood his ground with grace and conviction, while Colbert visibly unraveled under the pressure. The footage, shaky, grainy, and raw, spread like wildfire across every major platform, far faster than CBS could issue copyright takedown notices. The next evening, Colbert's opening monologue made no reference to the incident, a conspicuous silence that only fueled the public's curiosity. Meanwhile, Cage remained silent, allowing the unfiltered footage to speak for itself. It did, loudly. Behind the scenes, murmurs rippled through the entertainment industry. Colbert, once the gold standard of late-night authenticity, saw his credibility questioned. Ratings, already on a slow decline, began to plummet. Viewers were no longer convinced. The man who had built a career on satire and truth-telling had, in the eyes of many, revealed himself as a gatekeeper more interested in control than conversation. Cage, on the other hand, experienced a quiet resurgence. Audiences who had long seen him as a meme, a walking punchline, began to re-watch his films with fresh eyes. Critics published glowing reappraisals of his body of work, calling attention to the depth and risk that had always defined his performances. He wasn't a joke, he was an artist. And now, finally, people were listening. The fallout rippled through the industry. Several high-profile guests quietly canceled upcoming appearances on The Late Show. Writers and producers on Colbert's staff began seeking new jobs, unwilling to continue under a host whose mask had so publicly slipped. Behind closed doors, CBS executives debated the show's future. Their once untouchable star had become a liability. For Cage, the moment became a turning point. No longer just the eccentric actor of internet lore, he emerged as a symbol of artistic integrity, as someone unafraid to challenge the polished, risk-averse machinery of modern entertainment. In confronting Colbert, he had done something more than defend himself. He had exposed a system that punishes sincerity and rewards spectacle. What happened that night transcended late-night television. It sparked a larger conversation about media, performance, and the audience's hunger for something real. Do we want voices that challenge us, or ones that comfort us with polished platitudes? The public's answer, judging by their overwhelming support for Cage, was clear. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert never fully recovered. Though it continued to air, a fundamental trust had been broken. The illusion was shattered. Audiences could now see the strings behind every joke, every laugh, every spontaneous moment. Ironically, in trying to silence Nicolas Cage, Colbert had amplified his voice and message. What was meant to be just another celebrity interview became a defining moment in media history, a case study in what happens when authenticity crashes headfirst into artifice. 6 months later, during a press junket for his latest critically acclaimed film, Cage was asked about that fateful night. He paused thoughtfully and said, "I didn't go there looking for conflict. I went there hoping for conversation. The fact that one was impossible without the other says everything you need to know about the state of our public discourse." With that, he closed the chapter on one of the most talked-about moments in late-night history, walking away not just as a guest who broke the rules, but as a man who reminded an entire industry what authenticity really looks like. And that's the incredible story of how Nicolas Cage stood his ground against the manipulative tactics of Stephen Colbert and pulled back the curtain on the shallow spectacle we so often mistake for truth. If this story moved you like it moved me, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the drama behind Hollywood's carefully crafted facades. Drop a comment below. If you were in Nicolas Cage's shoes, would you have handled it differently? Or was he right to speak truth to power, no matter the cost? I read every comment, and will be highlighting the most insightful ones in our next episode. Until then, remember, the most revealing moments in Hollywood happen not when the cameras are rolling, but when the script goes out the window and authenticity walks in.